I got a note from Nora Ephron that day, the day that review ran, because one of the wonderful things about reporting the United States of Arugula is I interviewed Nora, and Nora wrote to me that day saying, I love your title, and I have a book coming out called I Feel Bad About My Neck, and we'll just see what he has to say about that.
This is Taste. I'm your host, Matt Rodbard. What a great conversation here with David Kamp, a journalist of the highest order and author of one of my favorite books on food, The United States of Arugula, the sun-dried, cold-pressed, dark-roasted, extra-virgin story of the American food revolution. In this episode, we talk about the book's legacy some 15 years after its publication. We also find out about what David is working on, including a Broadway musical. It's so great catching up with David Kamp, and I hope you enjoy this conversation. David Kamp, welcome to This Is Taste. What's up?
I'm so happy to be here, Matt.
I've just met you just now. You've got great shoes.
Well, I'm sure because this is an audio medium that our listeners are going to be thrilled to hear that.
They're going to be thrilled. But give us one line about your shoes because I really do think they're great shoes.
Well, I have to preface it, but I got them on sale.
Yeah,
couldn't
of course.
afford them others. They're Loro Piana cashmere shoes. They're like cashmere sneakers made of sweater material, and on a cold wintry day, which it happens to be, in case you're listening to this podcast in July while jogging in Miami Beach.
Yeah.
It's a cold, wintry day, and they keep my feet warm.
Yeah,
looking great.
They look great. You got the Jeremy Strong vibe going on here.
Quiet luxury. Yes.
Quiet luxury all the way.
Yeah.
Such a fan of your journalism. Such a fan. I've mentioned United States of Arugula, I think about a dozen times on the show. And
Thank you.
No, real one. I mean, I want to talk about the book and like get into how you wrote it. Your thoughts on it, decades later. But I first want to just get a sense, like, where are you eating out right now in New York? What's good?
Well, this time of year again, sorry to that Miami jogger again, it's a cold winter's day in New York City. My favorite restaurant, kind of in general, but especially this time of year, is Il Posto Accanto, which is this funky little Italian restaurant in the East Village Avenue. 2nd Street between Avenues A and B. And it's run by this couple. The chef is a Roman woman named Beatrice, and the front of house is run by her husband, Julio, who is Afro-Dominican from Washington Heights. So the pairing of them alone is kind of wacky and fun. Yeah. But then it's just incredibly good Roman food. You can get a small bowl of pasta, a Roman-sized portion, and then a meat course, and then just fortify yourself with really good wine. And yeah, Il Posto Accanto.
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah. I remember back in that part of the hood, Il Bagato used to be there.
It's the same people.
Oh, shout.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, they used to run them contiguously, Il Bagato and Il Posto Accanto. But for landlord reasons, classic New York story, they had to merge them into one entity. So this is the same people.
Such a great, thank you. I was like, I knew Il Bagato was around there. I used to live on 7th Street. I love that rack. Are you in the neighborhood? Are you an East Village guy?
I'm in the West Village, but that's not far.
Not far walk. Okay. Well, that's a good rack. Okay, United States of Arugula. Just first for our listeners, just what was your ambition and your aim when you wrote the book?
To tell the story of the arc of how food in America has changed over the 20th and early 21st century. And it came from a very personal angle. When I pitched this book, this was 20 years ago. I was in my 30s. I'm now in my 50s. But even in that span of my life, I'd witnessed so much change. I mean, Matt, you're a younger guy, but I can't stress how, like, when I was a kid, I can remember that. I mean, just think of, listener, your daily routine. You go to a Starbucks for this good quality dark roasted coffee, and then you might get sushi for lunch or even pick up grab and go sushi from the supermarket. And you might have homemade salsa with your dinner at night or something, or store-bought salsa. The point is, it sounds so remarkable, but when I was a kid, coffee was still something you bought chock full of nuts in a tin, aluminum can that your mom made in a percolator on the stove. And
that was ground like probably, 12 months ago.
Yeah, or years ago.
Years or 12 years ago, yeah.
Yeah. It's so the idea and sushi, forget it. I mean, it was so unheard of. My mom was a research scientist for Johnson & Johnson. And when I was about 11, she had to fly to Palo Alto, California for a conference. I'm from New Jersey. And she came back and told my sister, brother, and me, kids, do you know what I ate in California? What, Mom? Raw fish. We all like, ew!
Yeah.
And of course, now it's like second nature that my children and everyone else's children, all of us are used to sushi as like a staple of everyday eating. And then like salsa, I can tell the same story that I went to a family wedding when I was a teenager, and I had these cool surfer cousins from San Diego come east for the wedding. And they were kind of like complaining, and one of them said, "Dude, you people need to learn about salsa." and my answer was, "What's salsa?"
Amazing.
And I wasn't 5; I was 17.
Yeah.
So those are all profound changes, and I don't think no one had stepped back as an author and looked at how all this happened, and not just this. Just like it's about cooking, it's about cookbooks, it's how we shop, how markets work, how the celebrity chef thing was beginning to happen in that period, like early 2000s.
Yeah, it's remarkable how quickly of a sea change it was. And you talk about Dean and DeLuca, and we'll get into that. You talk about products like balsamic vinegar becoming lexicon. You talk about Alice Waters. But I want to get a sense of just the publishing history. Was it a tough one to sell?
Not at the time, because I was in this very building, and it was a division of Doubleday called Broadway Books, all under the Crown mantle now.
Yeah.
No, because I think that it was enthusiastically received because, to the editor's credit, they saw that we were in this inflection point moment. And there was one guy here, Steve Rubin, who just passed away, and he was at Henry Holt later on, who was a self-described foodie. And he was sort of a high-ranking executive who said, yes, this is the time to do this book.
I love it. And it really did explode onto the scene. And it changed the way I think many journalists, like myself, younger at the time, journalists appreciated the history that maybe we didn't know about.
And I'm so thrilled to hear that, because I wrote this book because I thought it already existed and was shocked that it didn't.
Yeah.
So I thought, well, someone better write it. Might as well be me.
And you by trade, you're an editor at GQ. You
and
wrote
Vanity Fair.
And Vanity Fair. And you were not like a food writer. You were a general journalist writing some really interesting profiles and work at Condé Nast. And you dipped into the food world, but it was beyond dipping in. What was the reporting of the book like?
It was really thorough and arduous. It took a long time. But I loved it because, and this is another difference between then and now, food people were really, chefs, farmers, restaurateurs, were really unused to being interviewed about their lives beyond the kitchen. Like, what motivated you?
Yeah.
What's your life journey? Now those are common questions to ask someone in the food world. But back then, they were so welcoming because they were like, yes, I have a story to tell. I remember seeing Judy Rogers at Zuni Cafe and sitting down with her, during the day when they were prepping for the lunch shift. And she was like so happy to tell her life story and to sketch out the full, blow by blow of how a girl in St. Louis, came to be this acclaimed chef
and create such an idiosyncratic restaurant in San Francisco. We just wrote a big piece about that cookbook actually.
Oh,
about the Zuni. Yeah,
it was a cookbook. It's an awesome cookbook.
It's like one. We call it canon now. I mean, it's like one of the best books.
It is.
But it's interesting you mentioned how these folks weren't used to being interviewed, and I have a similar sense when I started writing about food in the early 2000s. I had come from the music and television and film world, and like those guys are all media trained, and it was quite boring. But agree with you when you're interviewing a chef for the first time or their first time. They're like shocked, right? That you're talking to them. Was there an interview that you felt like that you had a real breakthrough moment for the book that just comes to mind right away?
Well, Judy does, because she got what I was trying to do. Like, a lot of people are like, what's the gist of the book? It's food as culture. And that's sort of what I was saying. Like, Food is not just something we eat. It's not just for cookbooks. It's a part of our culture that deserves as thorough an examination in nonfiction narrative form as a sports book does, or a book about the movies, or a book about ballet, or a book about literature. And she was the first one to 100% see eye to eye with me. She says, I know what you mean. Like, for example, when Paul Bocuse was on the cover of Newsweek in 1976, and then she went back to her office and had that issue, which she loaned to me, because that was valuable research. Like, she was talking about inflection points in her life where she saw that food was, leaking from the recipe page onto the front page.
Yeah, that's a very famous article. Is about the French Nouvelle movement. I think Roy Sokolov wrote it for Time magazine, I
Well,
believe.
aren't we knowledgeable, Matt?
Well, I'm not trying to name drop.
No, I'm impressed.
I got to interview Roy back maybe 15 years ago.
Wow.
And I definitely, it's Roy.
It's Ray.
Ray, I'm sorry.
Ray,
I totally messed up the name. I knew I did it right away. Ray, I got to get Ray in the studio. He's an interesting guy. Anyways, let's talk about being a little early. This book I felt was before its time. I hope you take that as a compliment. I mean, we've got, these Julia Child all day. It's been covered forever. Ian James Beard book, Jeremiah Tower documentary, The Chez Panisse Family Tree. There's dozens of people who have cookbooks and are celebrities. You're writing about all of them, and they're not celebrities in the moment. It's just an interesting. Do you feel you were a little early with United States of Arugula?
Absolutely. Because it came out in 2006 and the paperback in 2007. It got great reviews and it did really well. So I'm forever grateful for that. That's all good. That said, it was a little ahead of the curve in terms of like food kind of, and also the mainstreaming of good food and that mediaization of good food really changed in the years to follow. Like I remember talking to Tom Colicchio, who's now this top chef star, and he was feeling guilty about even expanding craft from like one restaurant to three. Yeah. And look at him now. I mean, and Padma and all. I knew these people then. Yeah. And Danny Meyer too. They're all talking about, I don't know, like, should I just have one restaurant? And then boom, that's all. That's all immaterial. When a few years later. So you're absolutely right that I think that I was writing about something that was coalescing into a juggernaut, but it wasn't yet a juggernaut.
I mean, but even though you were early, and I'm glad you said it was commercially successful, I'm glad to hear that. There's something about being there first and being there early that you can never repeat. I mean, do you feel like these stories that they told you then maybe have changed over history, like revisionist history almost?
Well, yeah. I mean, like I said, I have no regrets because it was virgin territory, meaning first of all, there were no publicists. You could just call people. I would just call the main line of the restaurant and say, may I speak to the chef, please? And they'd put the chef on and say, I'm David Kamp and I'm doing this book about food history. Yeah. Can I come by? And the answer was almost always yes. Yeah. And of course, and then they fed me as well. And so it was really convivial. So that was great. And the other thing is getting people at that time when they were still young and active enough to have full memories. Like the Chez Panisse scene, a lot of the people who I interviewed for the book have only in the last 2 years died. Yeah. And so I got them 20 years ago when their memories were still relatively fresh and they were able-bodied enough to like show me physically how they prepared things. And so that's important too. And that's like a bit of advice I would say to anyone who's a journalist about writing a book is like, if someone says I'm available for an interview, hop on the next plane, train, or whatever to meet that person, because you've got to seize the moment. Because I've had that. Julia Child agreed to be interviewed for the book, but then passed away before I could get to California.
Oh, yeah, man. Oh, rough.
Yeah.
But let's go back to Chez Panisse, because I think, and Alice Waters wrote a bit about it in her memoir, but I think your scenes in your book paint this really vivid picture about a group of people. They weren't just hippies. They were like living a life of, it was like art and farming coming together in this very unique way. Paint that picture for us.
Well, it's the 60s. Yeah. It is a hippie era, and it's a counterculture. Counterculture is almost more important than hippie.
Better.
Meaning there was a lot of like rebellion against their parents' generation of norms and behaviors. And actually another way my book was early is that I got a lot of flack for talking about people's sex lives and sexual preferences, because that seemed at the time, 2006, to be a violation of the etiquette of how you talk about food people, as if their sexuality had no bearing on who they were as people,
right?
And how they fell into the food world. And so Chez Panisse was Alice Waters talked about this. It was very much sexual liberation played into her approach to the sensuality of food and who could do what task, meaning that you didn't gender who was a front of the house person and who was a chef and who was a sous chef, how that was all, those roles were, redefined.
Yeah. And her relation with Jeremiah Tower, which I think is a rich text, could be a real, its own film. I feel its own scenes.
Right.
Yeah.
But I mean, so much of it, and it came out of protest. Students for a Democratic Society were on the Berkeley campus in California, and a lot of the Chez Panisse people were Berkeley people, and indeed the restaurant is in Berkeley. So it was a lot of this folding of idealism, rebellion, kind of back to the land ethos, which is partly absorbing French culinary tradition, which is much more, we take fish from the river and we take grains and vegetables from the ground.
But radical in a restaurant setting, particularly in the 60s and 70s. I mean, think about putting like the farmer's name on a menu.
Yeah.
Shea was probably one of the first in the country to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Laura Chanel's goat cheese.
Yeah.
Like that was first of all, goat cheese by itself was another thing that most Americans were not eating. It was only a European thing. It's sort of like my mom talking about raw fish. If you said to the average American, this cheese is made from the milk of a goat, people would go, ew. But Laura Chanel was making really good fresh chev in Sonoma County. That's another important factor, that Berkeley was near Napa and Sonoma, which is this, profusion of wonderful produce and cheese and wine. So that helped. Location.
It's like been sprinkled with fairy dust.
Yeah.
If you go there at the right time of year. I mean, it is incredible.
So the stars were aligned geographically and ideologically and just in terms of the people for all this to coalesce into Chez Panisse.
A big part of the book, too, about United States of arugula is the way California and France had this sharing of ideas, mostly Californian chefs and farmers taking extracting technique from France. And, that really founded this new American cuisine, which you're right about. And I'd love to get your sense of how did that transfer of energy work? Because there was a time when California didn't have viticulture, it didn't have, these techniques of cheese making that are common in Normandy. How did that happen?
Well, I think it starts during and post World War II, when you had a lot of GIs like stayed over after the war ended just to eat some French food, or even like during the celebrations, the French, this really happened, would feed the GIs, and they developed a taste for French food. Oh, this stuff is good. And then post-war prosperity, suddenly people have disposable income. And there's now airplane travel that becomes affordable to the middle class, not just the super rich. And so you can travel to places like France and Italy and Spain, but especially France. And then it starts to be people borrowing from French cuisine, aspirational. But then as far as the hippie counterculture Chez Panisse thing, it's the idea of American food had been moving towards convenience and fast food in the mid-century.
And commodity.
Commodity.
Yeah.
And so you had factory farming. We were all moving towards one big burger. The fast food chain thing started in the 50s.
I mean, the 50s was a real just the dip in our culture, in our food culture.
Right. And even in my early childhood, my mom was a really good cook, but kind of almost at the kids' urging, we wanted those things. We wanted Hamburger Helper. We wanted Rice-A-Roni because they were advertised on TV as these convenience foods until we realized that they were crap compared to what we could really have. But that thing, that realization is thanks in large part to visionaries like the people on the California scene, who basically what they did was they appropriated the French idea of using what's fresh and using what your locale gives you, whether it's coastal and it's from the sea, or whether it's farms or whatever, and using that. And so California cuisine in a lot of ways was a mimicry of French methods, but using indigenous ingredients.
Really, really well said. And then let's pop south to Los Angeles, because that is also part of your narrative and what's happening with Michael McCarthy in that world. But give a sense of like how LA, maybe a decade later, became a different type of progressive food movement.
Well, it's similar, actually. It's actually the same. A lot of the same people, like a lot of Chez Panisse people migrated south, like Jonathan Waxman, who is now here in New York. But what they did was they took it even further away from France. The Chez Panisse and Bay Area scene still was kind of quasi-French food. Yeah. And the idea of Waxman and Michael McCarty, who opened the original Michael's in Santa Monica, was we don't even have to aspire to be French. We can just make solid, roast chicken that's a native roast chicken to this area, and we'll use the best ingredients and the best razor clams and scallops and what have you, and just prepare them in an unpretentious way.
It's radical if you think about, our food culture now, and younger listeners might be like, well, this is like everywhere. You go to, Topeka, and there's like 5 places that do incredible farm-to-table cooking. But back then in the 70s, it's like not everywhere. It's remarkable.
I can't stress this enough. Like that, I could remember when things happened. I can remember when balsamic vinegar happened.
Yeah.
Meaning one day it existed, it didn't exist, and the next day it did. I remember when Tuscany happened. I'd never heard of Tuscany until I was 20. My image of Italians and Italian food was Sicilian.
Of course.
I didn't know it at the time, but I knew it was Southern Italian. It was red sauce and mangia, all that stuff. I did not realize that there were like 18 other regions of Italy with their own distinct cuisines.
Yeah, and it's a great segue when you talk about balsamic vinegar to the story of Dean and DeLuca, and that sticks with me. Your reporting around the founding of this influential store and how the buying there really did shape this new movement of food retail. And we talk about food retail all the time on this show, and I think our listeners may appreciate how you dove into Dean and DeLuca about how they brought these products to not the masses, but to a very specific style of consumer. It's downtown New York City. It's a certain level of wealth, but still a very influential part. I want to hear about that reporting, but also, man, what a fucking sad story about Dean DeLuca, the way it died.
Yeah, because, the Joel Dean and Giorgio DeLuca and their third partner, Jack Chiglick, sold the business, and then it passed through several pairs of hands, and it just, that's what happens.
Yeah.
I mean, they deserve their payday, but you kind of wish that whoever inherits that legacy honors it. But we've seen time and again that's not usually how it turns out. In fact, I know the guy who owned Murray's Cheese, Rob Kaufeld, and he sold it to, I think, the Kroger supermarket chain. And so far, it seems to be doing well. Like I see it in supermarkets, little kiosk, and they're kind of honoring the ethos of Murray's Cheese. But it doesn't always work that way. And Dean and DeLuca is one of those examples where it just went down the tubes.
So, and Rob, get that guy talking. Wow, I got to get that guy on the show.
Oh, yeah.
He's really cool. But let's talk about the founding of Dean and DeLuca and what that meant, and what was it like to bring, it wasn't just products from Emilia-Romagna, but it's products from all over Europe and all over Asia to a store.
Right. Well, I'm glad you mentioned Europe and Asia, because here's the thing, is that the story, I alluded to it earlier, of American cuisine in the mid-century was assimilation, meaning we were burgers were the ideal, the cookout, barbecue, that was the ideal. And Giorgio DeLuca was a guy whose dad worked, before the World Trade Center existed, there was a Washington Market, Washington Street, on the Lower West Side of Manhattan, where vendors would buy and sell fruits and goods imported from other countries. Giorgio DeLuca's father is an Italian foods vendor, and he grew up ashamed of bringing his soppressata and radicchio to school because it was seen as weird or stinky. And same with Asian people that I had interviewed. They said, like, I would bring my fermented kimchi to school and people would wrinkle their noses. Yeah. So I was like shamed into bringing peanut butter and jelly. Nothing wrong with peanut butter and jelly, but there was this big thing of, it's gross and not American enough.
Yeah.
Giorgio DeLuca had this realization that this stuff was good thanks to Joel Dean. Giorgio DeLuca, when he's a young man, he's living in this like lower flat in a brownstone. The upper flat is occupied by a gay couple, and that's Joel Dean and Jack Chiglick, who are both American. And they were just that cultured gay couple, mentor couple that every young person who comes to New York dreams about.
Yeah.
And Giorgio DeLuca, even though he's a New York City native, he realizes that they're saying, no, that stuff that you're raised with is awesome. And we think that there should be, a shop. And Jack Chiglick is the guy who had the design eye and created that sort of very spare, just, aluminum rods and bare white walls.
That merch is like worth so much money. And also he stepped aside and allowed alliteration to happen.
In the name of alliteration, because Dean DeLuca and Chiglick or Chiglick Dean DeLuca wouldn't have worked. Nope. So he said, I will step back, and Joel's my partner and my love. Guys, you can have the names on the business as long as I'm a full partner.
It's really, really cool story.
But the point is that they became adept through design and just like reframing things that, no, these foods from Italy and Asia are awesome. And Giorgio was the front man, the sales evangelist, who would stand there in the original store on Prince Street and hustle his wares as samples to passersby. And this is when Soho was not the
Prince
Soho.
and Broadway. I mean, it's like such an iconic like corner, and it's not that now.
No, but this is even before that. There used to be a one where the Apple Store is now. No, it's actually
that's Spring Street.
It was Prince.
Oh, Prince, you're right.
It was Prince, but it wasn't the Apple Store block. It might have been One West.
I got it.
The point being, it was on Prince. It was the original one was on Prince Street on the north side, and it was smaller, but it was so beautiful and so sensual. When you walked in, if you went one direction, it smelled of fresh coffee, which was again not a common thing then. And in another direction, you would smell these cheeses that you'd never smelled in an A&P supermarket, you know?
Do you get a sense of how the buying worked? Because I know you wrote about it in the book, but maybe there's like the way that, Dean and DeLuca was able to import products. It was not, there was no, internet, obviously, and it had to be done in a very different way, I'm sure.
It was very face-to-face retail. And in fact, balsamic vinegar, you can't say that one person made it happen, but Giorgio DeLuca is as responsible as anyone. And he told me about how he went to Modena looking for something else. And then someone clued him in, you should talk to this guy about his vinegars. And he said it was a rainy night. He had to drive up to the top of a hill in bad weather. And some guy he meets in this house sprinkles out of some, amphora or something, like some ancient...
battery, right? Like one of the batteries, right?
Yeah.
One of those cool batteries, yeah.
Yeah, ancient balsamic vinegar that's been aging for years and is syrupy, not like the kind of like generic kind you buy in a store. And his mind was blown by it. And by the way, this wasn't something that's used in Italy the way it is in America. But in a way, that's kind of not a bad thing. So it got popularized as a gourmet, upmarket, expensive item at Dean and DeLuca.
Yeah.
But I think an interesting thing about America is how something like that, which wasn't even in common use in Italy, became in America repurposed for other uses. That's not always a bad thing.
No, absolutely not. I mean, there, it's used, on hard cheeses and maybe before the course. Now we've got like balsamic chicken, which is like marinated with balsamic.
Right. No, they use it to anoint things like a bolito misto or something.
Right, bolito misto is a good one.
Like a tiny bit of olive oil, a tiny bit of balsamic vinegar.
United States for Arugula, I say that name a lot. A.O. Scott, I'm just going to pick, I have a bone to pick. He called it a horrendously titled new book in a very positive review. Fucking wrong. That is a great title. What do you think about the title? Now we've got 20 years between it.
I still think it's great. I mean, I like my title.
Good.
And by the way, Tony Scott, as he is known...
To friends.
He's not my friend, but he's a guy I respect as a writer, and I'm grateful to him for his review because it was a really positive review. That said, a lot of people picked up on him calling it horrendously titled, and I got a note from Nora Ephron that day, the day that review ran, because one of the wonderful things about reporting the United States of Arugula is I interviewed Nora. She was one of my first interviews, and out of that interview came a friendship that endured right till she died. And Nora wrote to me that day saying, I love your title. And I have a book coming out called I Feel Bad About My Neck. And we'll just see what he has to say about that.
Oh my God.
And that book became a huge bestseller. And so we kind of commiserated over like, look, we both chose weird, wordy titles and we prevailed.
Have you ever thought about a documentary project tied to this book?
Yeah. Again, I was ahead of the curve.
You were.
Like I was approached by some not some people who I wasn't that impressed with, right after the book came out.
Yeah.
And I think it's actually a good time to revisit it as the basis for a documentary or a documentary series.
I agree. We talked off mic, but I feel like if you are compelled, you have other projects. I want to get to that too. But like you could write some kind of sequel to this book, and it would be wonderful to get your take on how the food movement has changed in the past 20 years.
Thank you. At the very least, I'd like to do an updated edition. Like it would be good to sort of do one with 2 new chapters that cover some of the ground since the book came out.
Yeah.
It's been 18 years.
Okay, let me ask you then, looking back, do you regret not covering anything, anyone, any people, any person in the book?
Yeah, I would say what I wish I'd done more of is near the end of the book, because of the era in which I was writing it, I got a little too caught up in the celebrity chef thing because it was so new and such a novelty. This is when Emeril Lagasse had a sitcom, and it was like, and I wish I'd kept it more at what I call the ground level, which means like more about the consumer experience and the grocery experience and the shopping experience, and more about farmers, because I actually was on the Today Show to promote the book, And I was asked, what do you think is the next big thing? Inevitably, they asked you that.
Yeah.
And I said, I think we're going to learn more about the farmers. You heard of celebrity chefs? We're going to have celebrity farmers. And everyone thought I was joking, and I wasn't. And it was kind of...
Oh my gosh, the guy from Nyman Ranch gets like, $100 million for his
Right, Bill Nyman. But I mean, the celebrity thing is less important than we've since become way much more aware of who our farmers are. And young people are going into farming.
Yeah.
They know it's a hard life, but they're doing it because they see dignity in it.
It's a great book. I could talk all day, but I want to get to other projects. Definitely, I'm going to link to the show notes. It's still in print, right?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, it's still in print.
How dare you?
I mean, I looked it up last night. You can buy it on Kindle, you can buy it everywhere. So you should buy this book. If you're a fan of food history, definitely pick it up. Let's talk about Ruth Rogers. You're working with her, famous British chef and restaurateur. You're working on adapting her podcast into a book. What's it like working with Ruth?
She is the most wonderful person in the world. Just to contextualize for your listeners, Ruthie, we call her Ruthie.
Yeah, Ruthie is.
Ruthie is actually American, but she married Richard.
Right.
She married Richard Rogers, the architect.
100% forget about that always.
The guy who designed the Musée Pompidou in Paris, among other amazing buildings. And he died 2 years ago. They'd been together almost 50 years.
Yeah.
She's an American who moved to London with him because he was from Britain. And with Rose Gray in the 80s, she opened this, originally it was a canteen for his architecture practice, but it sort of grew into like one of the most important restaurants in London, if not the world. And Ruthie has a podcast kind of like this one. It's just very convivial, easygoing, except her friends, because like Nora Ephron, she's a collector of people, of like amazing people.
Yeah.
And so when she has people on, it's like Michael Caine, Paul McCartney, like Lorne Michaels, Tina Fey.
Yeah.
The list goes on.
What is the draw to Ruthie then? I mean, I'm curious because I do realize and recognize her ability to bring some huge names. Is it the restaurant status in the UK, or is it just her ability to be friends?
It's a combination of those things. It's like the River Cafe I would say it's akin to the Union Square Cafe in New York City, in that they both came up in the same time. Both Ruthie and Rose and Danny Meyer were non-Italians who revered Italian food. And they wanted to sort of bring their version of Italian food to the public and had huge success and expanded as a result. Ruthie, like I said, Ruthie and Nora Ephron have in common that they have the bandwidth to maintain 10,000 close friendships, genuine friendships. Like I have maybe 40 friends who are truly close friends, and then I maybe have another 200 people who are acquaintances. They are unique, powerful, dynamic people who have 10,000 friends that are real friends. And also, because of their dynamism, some of them are the most notable people in the world.
Yeah. Great answer. We call those people fabulous.
Fabulous.
Exactly.
And so this, just briefly, this is something I do sometimes. I help well-known people out with their books. And Ruthie just wanted to turn her podcast into a book of stories that well-known people tell about their food journeys. And it's not just, here's what I like to eat now as a rich person. It's like, Michael Caine, I was born in poverty in South London. Or the director, Steve McQueen, 12 Years a Slave, saying, I was born in a West Indian community in West London, and we had no money, but my mom was a great cook, and she knew how to make a great, a great Jamaican, stew chicken and stew fish.
Oh my gosh!
And so they have these stories about really, really vivid, life-affirming stories of their food journeys from infancy to the present.
God, shout out to Steve McQueen. I love Small Acts. That series on Amazon. Yeah. Incredible.
In fact, he said Small Acts is like a tribute to his childhood, and a lot of it is like two of the episodes of Small Acts are about food.
Oh, they are. I know. I love
the Mangrove Restaurant one. And there's an episode called Lover's Rock.
Lover's Rock's my favorite.
And mine too. Wow. And they both have big food elements that come out of his really, really fond memories of the the community he grew up in.
So Ruthie is basically just like putting you on an email with these people, and you're getting to interview them, or how's that work?
Well, it's mainly working with Ruthie on. I mean, we have transcripts, but a bit of that too, and a bit of like, can Wes Anderson clarify what he meant when he said, and then we go to Wes and so forth.
That's really, really exciting for you as a journalist to be able to like tap in with these people. I'm sure you're learning a lot about these different ways people eat.
Right, and very few famous people, notable people, came from wealthy backgrounds or privileged backgrounds. Yeah. So you hear a lot of really rich stories of humble origins, and almost the more humble the origins, the better the stories about the food.
You're an interesting guy, David.
Thank you.
You're just an interesting guy to talk to. No, I mean that because you're a journalist, but you're a lyricist, which means you write lyrics for Broadway plays, musicals, and you're working on a show with John Leguizamo called Kiss My Aztec. I mean, first off, what does a lyricist do? I'm so fascinated in this.
Well, I actually, as a kid, always wanted to be... I wish that I was alive in that period, like the 30s and 40s, when lyricist was actually a job. Like George Gershwin had his brother Ira write all the words to the songs. Yeah. And like, there's so many, like the guy, Yip Harburg, he was the lyricist for the Wizard of Oz songs. Like, and I love the internal rhymes. Like there's just a real cleverness. It's not that far off from humor, which I also write, because you're basically trying to be really economical while having a greatest impact, especially in a live show. Because in a live show, unless it's Hamilton and everyone already knows the soundtrack, most people are hearing the song for the first time. So it's not like a radio song. If you're a lyricist for the stage, you have to write a song that's going to get across the very first time the audience hears it. And so you have to be very clear. You can't be garbled. You've got to be clever enough for the jokes to like register and get a laugh. And so, and when you called me a Broadway composer or lyricist, excuse me, I'm flattered, but we're not quite. Kiss My Aztec is coming to Broadway. It is yet to open.
It's coming to Broadway, meaning you're gonna like workshop off Broadway and then eventually upstream.
We have already done out of town productions of it in La Jolla, Berkeley, and Hartford, Connecticut.
La Jolla, that's a good one.
Yeah, La Jolla Playhouse. Now these are major pre-Broadway theaters, so we've done it, and now it's just a matter of the usual.
You're there.
Jockeying for position and financing, and we'll get there.
Did you have some good fish tacos in San Diego?
Of course I did. But here's the thing. So speaking of West Indian food, when I was in Hartford has a huge Caribbean community. I had the best Jamaican food outside of Jamaica I've had in my lifetime.
Oh, right. Yeah. I love to hear that. I want to hear more about lyricism. And lyricism? Is that what you call it? Lyricism?
You could say there's a lyricism to my writing, and I'd be very flattered. But I think you just mean lyrics writing.
Lyrics writing. So, is there a food concept in your head that you're going to write? Is it the great food musical going to happen?
Well, what's going to happen is that I can't help it because I love food. Like my two main things that I love in life for pleasure are food and music, and lyrics kind of combine the two because it inevitably happens, whether I'm conscious of it or not, that my lyrics are studded with food references. Yeah. And like there's one in Kiss My Aztec. Basically, the show is a revisionist history where the Aztecs outwit and triumph over the Spanish conquistadors rather than get eradicated by them. And in our show, the big villain is a mean Spanish viceroy named Rodrigo. And he sings this song where he's basically saying that, explaining why the Spanish are racially superior not just to the Aztecs, but to everyone else in the world. And one example he gives is we invented tapas. So I wrote this lyric like, some olives, croquetas, and batter fried squid. No country did tapas till we Spanish did. And so that's just one couplet that flies by. But here's the thing. The choreographer decided to have a tapas waitress pirouette in, and this is a trained dancer, bearing a tray of papier-mâché tapas. So you actually have, made by our property master, this beautifully rendered olives, croquetas, and batter-fried squid being danced with on affixed to a tray by this like trained ballet dancer. And it's surreal that like something I wrote, some stupid joke I wrote on a whim becomes a prop.
Yeah. And it's now like danced and twirled.
Yeah.
Did you see the new Sweeney Todd?
Yes, I did.
Yeah, yes. I know Shirley and I both have seen it as well. I mean, Is Sondheim, is he like on the podium? Is he like the number one? Is he on Rushmore for you?
Of course. Well, I mean, for me, I like the older, the pre-Sondheim guys the most.
Yeah.
Like I said, the Gershwins and Harold Arlen, Johnny Mercer,
Your
Cole
humor
Porter.
kind of feels it's in that level a little bit more.
Antiquated, yes.
Well,
I get what you're saying.
I'm sorry. That came off.
No. I appreciate.
What's genre? You writing a genre, maybe?
Well,
Wow, I'm really digging myself a hole
no,
here.
not at all. I mean, no, I would say that I fantasized about having been a lyricist in the 30s and 40s. And
Yeah.
I won't ramble on further about this, except to say John Leguizamo has been a friend for a long time. And I said this to him one day, long before Kiss My Aztec existed. I said, I'm a print writer, but I really wish that I could have been one of those, Ira Gershwin-style lyricists in the 1930s. And then John, like 10 years later, said, remember that conversation we had? Well, I've got a show. I've written a play that seems like it wants to become a musical. And you said you wanted to be a lyricist. Do you want to be the lyricist?
Oh,
that's how that started.
So amazing.
Yeah.
And so when are we expecting it on in theaters in New York?
In a theater, because it's a
right. You called me out. A theater. I guess I was thinking it was going to upstream from Upright, but you've got a Broadway house already.
Yeah, I mean, probably late this year, or even more likely 2025, because it takes a while to like bring everything together.
Oh, that's so exciting.
Yeah, I'm thrilled.
Wow, I love that so much. On This Is Taste, we asked Esther about their discerning taste. So to close this conversation, here is a rapid-fire, fast and furious taste check. David, are you ready?
I'm intimidated but ready.
The best fruit.
Blueberries.
Why?
There's something mysterious and elusive about blueberries. Like, are they even really blue? Like, when you look at them, you're looking kind of at the refraction through the beads of condensation on them, and their taste is elusive. Like, they're astringent, they're sweet, they have an interesting texture, they're mushy inside, but kind of, tight outside. I kind of love everything about them.
I love this choice, and unless you live in West Michigan, it's difficult to find a good blueberry.
Well, in New England in the summer.
I know.
Late summer in New England.
I'm just
you're busting my chops?
I know I'm just giving some West Michigan pride, but I think there are good ones in Maine as well and New England. The worst vegetable.
Oh, I will not libel vegetables.
Why not?
Because
you want.
Because in America, we have enough of a problem selling people on vegetables. And my experience with vegetables is I had terrible kale and terrible broccoli when I was a kid, but it's just because I was having it prepared the wrong way or was the wrong kind of kale. So it's basically it's usually a matter of finding a way into how do I make this vegetable in a way that it'll be pleasurable.
It's like adding some balsamic vinegar, maybe.
Precisely.
But also, we've had this topic come up. They've made, like, Brussels sprouts used to taste really bad, and they've been genetically modified to taste better.
It's not entirely that, though.
Yeah.
Brussels sprouts used to be overcooked to a fare-thee well.
Yeah, true enough.
And people have figured out not to do that.
Your favorite NYC restaurant right now?
Well, I already mentioned Il Posto Accanto, so I'll just pivot over to another Italian place, Via Carota, which is not a shocker. It's one of the most popular restaurants in New York, but bite for bite, Jody Williams and Rita Sodi make the best food in New York.
Your favorite American fast food chain?
I would say Shake Shack, just because Danny Meyer figured out how to scale it. It was too much of a pain to go to Shake Shack when it first opened because there was such a huge line.
Yeah.
But now that it's expanded, you can find them in airports. Oh my God, I'm so grateful.
You can find them on the Jersey Turnpike.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is amazing, yeah. The best dessert?
Pie. I love a fruit pie. I love a pecan pie. I love a key lime pie, a maple walnut pie. Can I briefly tell a story about my love of pie? When I was a kid, we used to have to take these standardized tests in like first grade, like a proto-SAT. And there was one question which said, rank desserts in order of which is the best. And this shocked me even at age 6 or 7, because like they were asking for an objective answer to a subjective question. And the three things were ice cream, cake, and pie. And there was a right answer.
No.
I'm not kidding. And I had pie, cake, ice cream, because those are my personal preferences if I had to rank desserts. I had the wrong answer.
That's incredible.
The correct answer, the quote unquote correct answer was ice cream, cake, pie.
You have to write about
and
this.
I sound like a Gen Z person.
Yeah.
Saying that it was a different time isn't enough.
I love it.
I was traumatized.
Oh man, shots taken. I love this. No, but can you research this actual test?
It was they called it like the California standardized test, but it was given nationally.
You have to find this.
Like an aptitude test for first graders.
Your favorite cookbook of all time?
Of all time?
Yeah.
Woo. I would say Cuisine Rapide by Pierre Fernet has got to be up there, just because, as its title suggests, it kind of took the idea of distilled by like Julia Child and Craig Claiborne and so forth, and Jacques Pepin, but made them weeknight recipes.
Man, I didn't ask you about Pierre because we wrote a great piece about Pierre's quick cooking recipe book, his cookbook, and you had in the United States of Arugula a story about how he and Jacques Pepin consulted. Correct? They were consultants?
Oh, for Howard Johnson.
For Howard Johnson's, which
Yes.
is like a huge chain restaurant.
Howard Johnson's was, at the time, like it was talk about rest stops like Shake Shack.
Yeah.
It was at almost every rest stop on the New Jersey Turnpike and the New York Thruway. And the actual founder, Howard Johnson, was a regular at Le Pavillon,
Yeah.
which is the fancy French restaurant in New York where these guys got their starts. And when Le Pavillon, they both fell out, Pepin and Fernet, with Henri Soulet, who is the temperamental owner of Le Pavillon. Howard Johnson hired them to be consultants on how can we like improve the quality of the Howard Johnson's product. And so the chicken pot pies suddenly got a lot better.
Talk about ahead of your time, hiring fine dining chefs to consult.
But that's why it didn't work, because it was too ahead of its time. And I think the cost was too high to make it sustainable.
Is Fernet somebody that we still just don't talk about enough?
Well, I think it's partly a matter of he was of a time.
Yeah.
And, I was lucky to kind of get the end of his career, and like a generation older than me got the start of his career. And that's just how life rolls sometimes, is that some people live on forever, like Julia Child, and some people are semi-forgotten. But I will give a shout out to him because he was great.
Oh, man. Favorite recent cookbook discovery?
I would say Yewande Komolafe's My Everyday Lagos. And before you stop me, every Nigerian I know says Lagos and not Lagos, but My Everyday Lagos is also acceptable if you're ordering this book from a store. She writes for the Times, along with like Melissa Clark, and her recipes are just so great in the everyday paper. But the cookbook focuses on her Nigerian heritage, and it's just like for me, it's just another thing that I can add to my toolbox of approaches, like jollof rice. Just knowing how to make that, and I don't necessarily have to apply it to a full-on Nigerian dinner, but I can use that, as a complement to something else I'm making.
Great call. We had a great episode with Yewande on this show, and it is a really terrific book. It is one of the best of the year. Great call. A couple more. Your favorite city to visit outside America for the food? This isn't quite a city. I'm going to say Jamaica, which is a small country, but you can't say Kingston because it's really the whole of Jamaica. I really have grown to love West Indian food, and Jamaica is one of those places where if you go, eat the local food because it's never as good elsewhere as it actually is in Jamaica. I'm talking about the jerk chicken, where they're making fresh over an allspice wood fire that's been burning for 300 years. They just keep stoking it. So the depth of flavor there, and then like the meat patties and just the mangoes, the fruits and vegetables, the escovitch fish preparation, the pepper, the hot peppers. I just love the freshness of the flavors. And like I said earlier, Hartford's the only place I've experienced that even begins to approximate how good the food is in Jamaica. Back to Jamaica, how do you visit Jamaica? What's your way of...
You fly an airplane there, and you land in either Montego Bay or Kingston. Honestly, I had a really good initial exposure to Jamaica, there's a place called Treasure Beach, which is southwest Jamaica. It's St. Elizabeth Parish, which is way less touristed and less enclosed. Like you're in the communities, as opposed to if on the northern coast of Jamaica, you're sort of in a fortress, a tourist fortress. And the great thing about Treasure Beach is that you're among the population. You can kind of casually walk around and discover things, which is my preferred way of doing it.
Great tip. I appreciate that. A couple more. A cuisine you would like to learn more about?
Indian cuisine. I'm from central New Jersey, and when I was a kid, there was just beginning this wave of Punjabi immigration into the towns near me. I was in a town called Highland Park, and Edison and Woodbridge, neighboring towns, got really, really huge Indian populations really fast. So I liked Indian food from the outset, but what I've come to realize as an adult is that I was only having Punjabi food. And again, it's like I was saying about Italy. Every region of India has its own distinct cuisine. And like my son spent an internship at the Taj Palace in Mumbai. Wow. And he was telling me about the food there, which is completely different from Punjab food. And then there's, Rajasthani food. There's Chennai food, which is more seafood based and whatever. There's just so much variety. And I know I'll only ever scratch the surface, but I'm into that.
It's a great call. Last one, your favorite sandwich?
Open-faced tuna melt.
Is there a New York City destination to acquire, order, and eat the sandwich?
Well, my favorite one was University Diner on 12th and University Place. It's now a Sweet Green. FU gentrification.
I remember. I never went there.
I'm very bitter, but Eisenberg Sandwich Shop had a really good one too. And the guys who have taken it over, now it's called S&P Lunch. They do a very faithful version of the Eisenberg tuna melt.
Yeah, the S&P Lunch guys are really operating at the highest level.
I appreciate what they're doing. I mean, it's a little groovy now, which is problematic. Not the food or the employees, it's the client base. Yeah. I liked it when I was the youngest person there. Yeah. Now I'm the oldest person there when I go.
I know. I loved going to Eisenberg's. The food never really hit the mark, but it was such a beautiful experience.
It actually did hit the mark for me.
For you had a good experience there. David Kamp, what a pleasure having you in the studio. Thank you so much for joining This Is Taste.
And Matt, I am so grateful you had me here.
Hey, Eliza, what is up?
Not much, Matt. How are you doing?
I'm great. We're here with 3 things. What's your first thing?
My first thing is that I tried this pizza pop-up Wizard Hat pizza for the first time. Have you tried it? Why are you laughing?
Wizard in the name of a pizzeria. That is like, how is that not marijuana related?
Yeah, it's not. I'm going to say right now.
No, I'm just being like a jerk and judging by its name. I think it's a great name, but I've never heard of it.
It's a funny name. I feel like there are a couple restaurants in the city. Like my favorite Thai takeout place is called Nudes and Chill. And every time I recommend it to somebody, I'm like, please, like, just stay with me on this. It used to be the people that did Look by Plant Love House, if you ever went to that place in Prospect Heights.
I love that place. I'm sad about that place leaving, and I thought that name was intense.
Yeah, I liked that name. So they do, this is not even my first thing. They do Nudes and Chill. It's the exact same food. It's really good, but the name just seems like it's like a meme restaurant, So whenever I tell people about it, I'm like, stay with me. So Wizard Hat Pizza, stay with me, is a pop-up in Flatbush that this guy, Josiah Bartlett, is doing. And my girlfriend Shirley was filming a video there, so I got to eat all the leftovers, but they were not refrigerated. They were like, I think, pretty intact to the experience of eating it there, and they were really good. And I had like the sourdough pizza. I had like their take on a Hawaiian pizza, which had thin, crispy speck and pineapple on it instead of like big chunks of ham.
Oh man,
really good.
What's like the dough style? What are we talking like classic New York style?
It's a sourdough style, and I would say that the slices are a little smaller and thinner than what I would say is like a very classic New York style. It almost reminds me of like the pizza you could get in LA, I would say. The dough is like very bubbly and active, and I also really liked the spicy pepperoni pizza with hot peppers on it and like a little bit of honey. It just was a very like pleasing, satisfying pie.
Speaking of pizza pop-ups, have you been hearing about Chrissy's at all?
I have heard about Chrissy's, which is in the old Superiority Burger place, right?
It was, or it is going to be there eventually, but there's been permitting delays, so he's been popping up at Superiority Burger proper, the one on Avenue A, like for late night pop-ups, like, some real hypebeast shit. It seems like a good pie.
Yeah, I'll have to go try it and compare. There's a lot of pizza happening in the city.
Yeah. And what about Shy's? What do you think about Shy's?
Shy's Burgers?
Yeah, not pizza, of course.
I have never managed to eat a Shy's Burger because every time I've been somewhere where it's happening, the line has been so long that I've been too hungry. But I will say that the last time I was trying to eat a Shy's Burger, I did happen to be in the same space as FK Twigs because it was just on the street in like Dime Square, and she apparently, I don't think she was at the pop-up, but she was around the area.
Yeah,
so lots of hype
good
around
sighting. That. Shy's guy. We were DMing about doing a podcast.
He's a cool guy. I was at a Cyclones game with him over the summer randomly.
What is that gentleman's name?
Shy.
But like his name is Shy, just Shy.
Oh, I mean Clayton cut this because I don't know what his proper name is. He was at my friend's birthday party.
Okay, no, you don't have to cut that. We're being honest. Like I feel like I want to know you, Shy. So hit me up again if you're listening to this, and we'll talk about it. Okay. Yeah, that's a lot of pop-up talk.
It's a lot of pop. You know me, I'm always at the pop-ups. What's your first thing?
My first thing is not a pop-up, but is a piece of content that I just consumed right before coming down to record this. It is truly one of my favorite articles of the year. It's written by Priya Krishna. It is a massive profile in the New York Times food section on hand hospitality. It is a great story of a story that I've personally been pursuing for years and have never actually done what Priya did, which is speak with the founder of Hand Hospitality. Are you familiar with Hand?
No, I'm racking my brain because I feel like maybe I would know if I had an example.
No, it's cool. Let me break it down a little bit. Hand Hospitality Group has been operating in New York City for my gut is like it's about 8 years. They're behind some of the city's most prominent and exciting Korean American restaurants and Korean restaurants imports. I've spoken about some of them on the show, so I don't need to go into detail, including Ari Ari, Hojikban, Her Name is Han, Auto Mix, Auto Boy. We're talking about Lycée.
Yes.
There's 15 of them in total in New York. Low key operators. They're very media shy. And I thought Priya did such a nice job in capturing and just reporting on what their impetus is, what their mission is, and how they are operating these restaurants with kind of the opposite approach to most operators, which is they avoid all press. They're letting the restaurants speak for themselves. They don't really have chefs. I mean, Auto Mix and Auto Boy and So Salon are JP and Elia, and they're big names, but most of their operators are pretty anonymous, and they like it that way. Just love these restaurants. So I'm going to link to that article in the show notes. You should definitely check it out.
Yeah, I can't wait to read that. I obviously love Priya's writing. And I will say, just to defend myself as somebody who works in food media but didn't know the name of this group off the top of my head, I think it speaks to the fact that they are operating in this way, that all of the restaurants are ringing bells, but the fact that they're all connected is somewhat of a surprise.
Oh, it's cool that you say that. It's like your own point of view is I value it, and I think it says a lot about you're plugged into a lot of things, including pop-ups. And and the fact that you don't know about it is kind of this, I think, kind of a mini scoop or mini major scoop by Priya. Congrats on that scoop, Priya. I saw you at an event and we talked about this piece. Great work there. What's your next thing?
My next thing, so I like pop-ups. I like kombucha, obviously.
We talked about
this, and I tried a really cool new kombucha for the first time.
I love it.
Over the weekend. I was at Dear Friend, which is a really cool cafe, wine bar, bookshop kind of hybrid in Bed-Stuy on Tompkins. And I tried a new kind of kombucha from Unified Ferments, which is a brewer here in the city that does a lot of work with single origin tea and things like that. It's called Nilgiri Kunur, and it's one of their experimental blends. So I'm not sure how many places have it available right now. I think if you go to their kind of tap list in the city, would probably be the easiest way to find it. It's made from a black tea that's produced by this women-led team in the Nilgiri Mountains in southern India. And Unified Ferments on the bottle say things like coriander and candied orange peel. But I took a sip and I said, Arnold Palmer.
Oh, wow.
It really tastes exactly like an Arnold Palmer to me in a fun way.
Such a great compliment. So like there's a little bit of sweetness, but not too much.
In the glass, it's very opaque and cloudy and looks like it would be kind of a heavy drink, I would say. But then when you sip it, it has a lot of this kind of citrusy flavor with that black tea. And I think that's something I really like about kombucha brands when they use single origin teas and really kind of let that speak, because kombucha is fermented tea, but so many brands are just throwing in a lot of juice. So I would definitely recommend, in general, I like Unified Ferments, and I think this one is pretty cool.
Love that tip. And I think when we talk about NA, we sometimes do, except for you, forget about kombucha as like a category that is exciting. And it's tea adjacent, of course.
Unified Ferments does their kombucha in wine bottles, and they have beautiful labels. And I actually do bring bottles to my friends who don't drink when I'm going to a dinner party or something, just because it does feel kind of celebratory and it tastes a lot like what I would say a natural wine could taste like.
But without the booze. I mean,
without the booze.
I hope I'm going to... You wrote that great NA piece, the beverage piece last year. Let's do the kombucha piece.
Oh my God. I would love to do the kombucha piece. I feel like every couple of years, someone lets me write a kombucha story.
Well,
but
there's no allowing. You run taste with me, so let's do it together.
Let's do it. There's cool things happening.
I love it.
What's your next thing?
I want to call out a book that is being published in March that we're publishing here, and we're going to have the author on the show. It's called Vegan Mob, Vegan Barbecue and Soul Food, written by Taria Gordon with Corsha Wilson. I saw Corsha last week, and we talked about this book. It's really cool. Are you familiar with Vegan Mob? It's a Bay Area food truck and restaurant group.
I think I've seen this on Instagram, but I love Corsha's work also, so it seems like a cool collab.
It's really cool that Corsha did a terrific job working in concert with this restaurant group, and what they're doing is vegan Calmex. And what I like about the book is it's very cookable. I would say they lean into the Impossible Burger, fake chicken patty ground beef realm, which I think is great. I think when we're talking about cooking plant-based, there's two ways to go. You could say everything from scratch, or you could say using some of these products. And I'm not going to judge either, but I think for me, personally, I would cook more from this book, and the recipes are just off the page, jumping out. And they're doing, I would say, like a loaded nacho, buffalo chicken fried mushrooms, and even a vegan gumbo. And I just love the way this book is put together. Of course, I look at the cover and interiors. I'm like, man, these photos are amazing. I'm like, who's the photographer? And of course, it's Ed Anderson, who shot Food IQ and I know well, and he just is able to make many things look absolutely delicious. Vegan Mob is the name of the cookbook.
Oh, I can't wait to listen to that episode.
Yeah, it's going to be fun. We're going to record it remotely, or maybe it'll come to New York. Well, stay tuned. It'll be coming out this spring/summer. What is your last one?
My last one is not food related, but I'm just really liking the new TV show, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, and I want to talk about it.
Let's talk about it. I feel like I've heard a little bit about it. There's been a little bit of a vacuum though with the PR. I don't know, is it? It's out now, right? Obviously, you're watching it.
It's out now. I've seen a couple episodes. You haven't seen it yet?
No, I want to.
I would just say the casting is really fun. I think Donald Glover has amazing chemistry with Maya Erskine, who you maybe know from the show Pen 15. Did you ever see that?
Every episode twice.
Okay.
Was so sad they killed that. It was like one season short.
I honestly could only watch one episode of that show because it made me so uncomfortable. Because if you're listening, you haven't watched the show, it's a comedy where these two grown women are playing their 12 to 14-year-old selves, probably, but everyone else is an actual teenager.
It's masterful. And this is kind of in your age range a little bit, zone-wise?
The time that they are in.
Yeah.
But it's so uncomfortable comedy, and it's really awkward, and I just can't really it makes me uncomfortable to watch. But it's really cool to see Maya go from doing that to playing essentially a cold-blooded killer spy who's been set up with Donald Glover, which if you watched the Mr. and Mrs. Smith movie, this is kind of in that same ecosystem, but different. But I think it's really cool. And it seems like a lot of the Atlanta crew are working on this show, which is just so evident, even before you get to the credits, in terms of the writing is so tight and super fun. And I would just recommend it to everybody if they need something to watch.
I love the pick and the fact that Atlanta crew is working on it. I mean, the filmmaking in it, this series Atlanta is just on a different level. I think some of it was quite challenging, which I think makes great television. I'm sure we'll go down that route with this. I just think it's a highly inventive plot structure in Atlanta.
Yeah, it's super cool. And also the look ahead at Mr. and Mrs. Smith has some of the craziest cameos and just actors in it, Sarah Paulson, Michaela Cole, Paul Dano, etc. It just seems like a really fun show.
I love it. It's Amazon can just add a zero to every paycheck and just get people of all types to work on their shows.
Yeah,
I love that.
And also I think just Donald Glover as a showrunner, people I think are rightly wanting to work with him on it. And I would imagine that he produced this with the intention of starring in it. And I think it was a really smart role for him also, because he's just kind of killing it. And the clothing is also really fun, as a side note.
It was originally going to be Phoebe Waller-Bridge as the opposite, and that didn't ever pan out. So this is a new casting.
Yeah, I think it's a cool casting.
Yeah.
I do love Phoebe Waller-Bridge.
Yeah.
What's your last thing?
My last thing is this. We're recording this on February 6th. February 7th marks the 8th birthday of Taste.
Oh, happy birthday.
Yeah, we're 8 years old, which is a great age.
Wow, should we throw an 8-year-old birthday party that's bowling and pizza?
I mean, or go to the zoo. I feel like I'm thinking, bowling, pizza, going to the zoo. I mean, it's definitely, you're starting to get up there where you're thinking about, adulthood a little bit in your brain as an 8-year-old.
Yeah, but your concept of adulthood is not what real adulthood is.
Of course. Well said. I mean, it's it's
like pizza for breakfast.
It's more what do you want to be is not astronaut anymore. It's I'm going to be a helper. It's you're a little more thinking about your future at 8.
Yeah, what did you want to be when you were 8?
When I was 8, I think I wanted to work for the Chicago Cubs.
Whoa, I mean...
/ live across the street from Wrigley Field.
That's the dream.
/ just watch baseball games from the rooftops all day. For me, at 8, the big city was Chicago. I didn't know what New York was. It was not on my radar. It was a general idea. And of course, I hadn't been to California. It was literally the big city was Chicago. So I wanted to move to the big city at 8.
That's cute.
How about you? What did you want to be at 8?
I'm trying to think about this. I loved to play make-believe and pretend. So I think I maybe was in an actress era.
Oh, yeah.
even though I don't think I actually wanted to do that, I think it was just for fun. But I do remember I really wanted to live in San Francisco because I grew up in LA and my mom's family is from the Bay Area. And that would be like the big city we would get to go to that wasn't LA, right? Because I think even as an 8-year-old, I was like, well, I can't live at home as an adult. That would be crazy. Which my parents are listening to this and they're like, yes, you can live in LA as an adult if you want.
Oh, I love it.
But yeah.
So yeah, 8 years. It's amazing. We had a launch party at Joy Luck Palace on February 7th, 2017. And it's been a great run. And Eliza, we've been working together on Taste for a couple years now. Shout out to Anna Heasel, Tatiana Batista, Talia Baiocchi, some of my old colleagues. But getting to eight feels like a moment. It's not like a round number, but food media and media in general is certainly not healthy. No. Going through a lot of changes. But I have to say, I have to really acknowledge the support that Taste receives from Crown Publishing Group and the folks here. And I really, this is truly a dream job. Every day I come here to work, I love meeting authors, talking about cookbooks, talking about food, cooking, culture. And it's just such an amazing thing that we're at 8 years old.
Yeah, it's so fun to be a part of it. And I do think we should do our 8-year-old birthday celebration somewhere.
I mean, I feel like it's got to be pizza. It's got to be milkshakes. Mm-hmm. Like for that, it's like too big. Like the sundaes need to be like too big for an 8-year-old stomach.
Like serendipity. That's where we have to go.
Let's go to serendipity, and then we can like barf at the end of it.
Okay, sounds good.
Sounds good. It's a deal. Eliza, great catching up with you.
You too.
This is Taste is hosted by Eliza Abarbanel and me, Matt Rodbard. The show is produced by Shalia Harris and Pat Stango and edited by Clayton Gumbert. Theme music by Steve Rydell. Visit Taste online at tastecooking.com and make sure to subscribe to our newsletter for updates on all cool things that are happening.